The first sign was a text message that wasn't meant for me. I remember that morning perfectly, a crisp October day in suburban Connecticut. Leaves turning golden outside our colonial-style home. I was making coffee in our kitchen, the one we had renovated together last spring. David had left his phone on the counter while he showered upstairs, preparing for another day at his law firm. We'd been married for 7 years, high school sweethearts who had built what I thought was an unshakable life together. The notification lit up his screen. Can't wait to see you tonight. Rachel, my best friend since college, the woman who had been my maid of honor, who held my hand through my father's funeral, who was supposed to be the godmother to the children David and I had been trying to conceive for the past 2 years. I stood frozen, coffee pot suspended midair, as more messages appeared. David, I miss you already. Last night was amazing. My hands trembled as I set down the pot. I shouldn't look. I shouldn't invade his privacy. But something inside me, intuition, self-preservation, or perhaps the quiet voice that had been whispering, doubts for months made me pick up his phone. The passcode was my birthday. The irony wasn't lost on me. What I found shattered every certainty I had ever known. Hundreds of messages spanning back for months, photos I could never unsee. Plans made while I worked late at the publishing house, lies told with such ease that I questioned every memory we had created together. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. With mechanical precision, I placed his phone exactly where he had left it, poured 2 cups of coffee, and sat at our kitchen island, waiting. David came downstairs, his dark hair still damp, wearing the blue tie I had given him for his birthday. He smiled, that same smile that had once made my heart race but now made my stomach turn. Morning, beautiful, he said, kissing my cheek before reaching for his coffee. I watched him sip, watched him check his phone casually, watched a flicker of something guilt, anxiety cross his face before he masked it with another smile. Busy day ahead? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Yeah, that Wilson case is going to trial next week. Probably working late again. He didn't meet my eyes as he said it. With Rachel, the words left my mouth before I could stop them. The coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. What are your messages? David, I saw them. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched his face cycle through shock, denial, and finally, a resignation that told me everything I needed to know. Leave. I can explain, don't. I held up my hand. Just don't. It's not what you think, he started, but his voice lagged. Conviction, it's exactly what I think, I said, standing up. You and Rachel. My husband and my best friend. He reached for me, but I stepped back. How long? David looked down at his hands that had held mine through every joy and sorrow of our adult lives. For months? He admitted quietly, for months. While I had been planning our anniversary trip to Maine, while Rachel had been having real talks with me about her dating life, while both of them had sat across from me at dinner parties, exchanging glances I had mistaken for friendly camaraderie. I need to go, I said, grabbing my purse and keys. Olivia, please, we need to talk about this. There was panic in his voice now. I can't be in this house right now. I can't look at you. My voice cracked for the first time. I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually finding myself at Westport Beach, where David had proposed 9 years ago. The October wind whipped around me as I sat on the cold sand, watching waves crash against the shore. My phone buzzed repeatedly. David, then Rachel, then David again. I silenced it without reading their messages. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the beach, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them see me break. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of destroying me. Something hardened inside. Might just not hatred, but resolve. I drove to the small hotel near the beach and checked in for the night. In a room that smelled of industrial cleaner and old carpet, I finally allowed myself to cry deep, wrenching sobs that left me gasping for air. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, for the friendship I had treasured, for the future that had been stolen from me. When the tears finally subsided, I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. With steady hands, I began to make a list, not of ways to hurt them, but of steps to reclaim myself. First item, find a temporary place to stay. Second, consult a lawyer. Third, begin the process of disentangling my life from David's. As I typed, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't the end of my story, it was merely the end of a chapter. And I would be the one to write what came next. I returned home the next day to find David asleep on the couch, his face haggard, still wearing yesterday's clothes. I moved silently through our house, packing essentials into a suitcase: clothes, toiletries, important documents, and the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother. He woke as I was zipping the suitcase closed in our bedroom. "Leave," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please don't go." I looked at him for the first time since my discovery. The man I had loved since I was 17 suddenly seemed like a stranger. "I'm staying with my sister for a while." I sighed, my voice devoid of emotion. "I've called a lawyer. She'd be contacting you. Can we just talk about this?" He ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "What happened with Rachel? It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. It didn't mean anything. If it didn't mean anything." "That's worse," I replied. "You threw away 7 years of marriage for something that didn't mean anything. I love you, Olivia, not her. It was just a physical." "Exciting, convenient," I supplied. "Save it for someone who hasn't read your text messages." David, his face crumpled. "I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything." For a moment, I wavered. Part of me, the part that still remembered the boy who had held my hand at senior prom, the man who had supported me through graduate school, wanted to believe him. But then I remembered Rachel's messages, the easy way they had deceived me, the calculated nature of their betrayal. "It's already ended," I said quietly. "Our marriage ended the moment you decided to sleep with my best friend." I left him standing in our bedroom, surrounded by the life we had built together. As I drove to my sister Kate's apartment in New Haven, I called my boss at the publishing house and requested a week of personal leave. Then I called my lawyer, a formidable woman named Eleanor, who had handled my father's estate. Kate was waiting for me with open arms and an open bottle of wine. Unlike our parents, who had always favored David and thought I was lucky to have married him, Kate had seen through his charm years ago. "That bastard," she said as I recounted the events of the past 24 hours. "And Rachel, I never trusted. Her perfect act." "I did," I said, the pain fresh again. "I trusted both of them completely." "What are you going to do?" Kate asked, refilling my glass. "Divorce him." "Obviously," I replied. "But first, I need to understand exactly what happened, how long it's really been going on. If there were others, and then what?" "His car burned. His clothes." I shook my head. "No, nothing like that." "Then what?" I took a sip of wine, considering. "I'm going to rebuild my life, but I want them to see it happen. I want them to witness what they threw away." Over the next few days, I moved methodically. Eleanor helped me secure my financial assets and begin divorce proceedings. I found a small apartment near my office and signed a 6-month lease. I blocked both David and Rachel on social media. I kept their numbers unblocked in my phone, not to communicate, but to see their increasingly desperate messages. "David, please come home. We need to talk about this." "Rachel, Olivia, I know I've done the unforgivable, but please let me explain." "David, I miss you. The house is empty without you." "Rachel, I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." Each message strengthened my resolve. Their guilt was not my burden to carry. A week after my discovery, I returned to work. My colleagues noticed the absence of my wedding ring, but respected my privacy. I threw myself into my projects, staying late to edit manuscripts and meet with Author's work had always been my sanctuary, and now it became my anchor dot in the evenings. I began taking a photography class at the community college, something I had always wanted to do, but had put off because David thought it was impractical. I found solace in capturing images, stark winter trees against gray skies, abandoned buildings with their quiet dignity, strangers with stories written in the lines of their faces. Through mutual friends, I heard that David was telling everyone I had overreacted, that his indiscretion was a one-time mistake born of a rough patch in our marriage. Rachel had apparently moved to Boston for a job opportunity, though I suspected it was to escape the judgment of our social circle. 2 months after I left our home, David asked to meet for coffee. Against my better judgment and Kate's explicit advice, I agreed. We sat across from each other at a neutral cafe halfway between his office and mine. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that gave me a perverse satisfaction. "You look good," he said, studying me with an intensity that once would have made me blush. "Thank you," I replied coolly. "I miss you. Leave the house. It's not a home without you." I took a sip of my latte, letting his words hang in the air between us. "Is that why you invited me here? To tell me you miss me? I wanted to see you. To tell you that Rachel and it's over. Completely over. It was a terrible mistake." "When did it end?" I asked, curious despite myself. He shifted uncomfortably. "The day you found out. So not because you realized it was wrong, but because you got caught." I clarified. "No, it's not like that." I was going to end it. David, I interrupted. "It doesn't matter anymore. The divorce will be final in 4 months. You're free to be with Rachel or anyone else. I don't want anyone else. I want you." He reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled back. "You had me," I said simply. "You had all of me, and you chose something else." As I stood to leave, he asked, "Is there someone new? Is that why you won't consider giving us another chance?" I looked down at him, this man who had been the center of my world for so long, and felt nothing but a distant sadness. "No, there's no one new, but there's someone I'm getting to know quite well, myself." Walking away from that cafe, I felt lighter than I had in months. David's hold on me was weakening, but my plan was just beginning to take shape. Spring arrived in Connecticut with a tentative warmth that matched my own gradual awakening. 6 months had passed since the day my world had imploded, and I was slowly piecing together a new life, one that fit me better than I could have imagined. My small apartment had become a sanctuary. I had painted the walls a soft sage green, hung my own photographs in simple black frames, and filled the space with plants that thrived under my care. For the first time in my adult life, every decision, from the furniture I bought to the food I cooked, was entirely my own. At work, I had been promoted to senior editor, taking on a list of authors that included a promising debut novelist whose manuscript I had championed against the publisher's initial skepticism. The book was now generating pre-publication buzz, and my professional reputation was growing. The divorce proceedings were moving forward without drama. David had agreed to my terms with surprising ease, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of a desire to expedite the process. We communicated only through our lawyers, a boundary I maintained despite his occasional attempts to reach out directly. Rachel had returned to Connecticut, according to mutual friends who still felt compelled to update me on her life. She had taken a position at a marketing firm in Hartford and was, by all accounts, miserable. David and she were not together, another piece of information I received with detached interest rather than satisfaction. On a warm Saturday in May, I was photographing an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town when my phone rang. It was Kate. "You'll never guess who I just ran into at the farmer's market," she said without preamble. "Who?" "Rachel, and she had the nerve to ask about you." I paused, lowering my camera. What did she want to know? How you were doing, if you were seeing anyone, if you ever talked about her. Kate's disgust was evident in her voice. I told her you were too busy living your best life to waste breath on her name. I smiled at my sister's fierce loyalty. What did she say to that? She looked like I'd slapped her. Said she misses your friendship, if you can believe that level of delusion. Then she mentioned some charity gala next week, in the one for the Children's Hospital. She's on the committee apparently, and she saw your name on the guest list. The gala, I had forgotten about it. As a representative of my publishing house, I had agreed to attend months ago, before everything had fallen apart. Are you still going? Kate asked. I considered for a moment. My instinct was to avoid any event where I might encounter Rachel or David, but then a different thought emerged. Why should I be the one to retreat? Yes, I decided. I'm still going. The week that followed was filled with purpose. I scheduled a session with a stylist who helped me select a dress that was elegant without trying too hard, a deep emerald silk that complemented my newly highlighted hair and the confidence I had been cultivating. I booked appointments for a facial and a manicure, small indulgences that felt like declarations of self-worth. The night of the gala arrived with perfect early summer weather. The event was being held at the Bramford House, a mansion on the Connecticut shoreline with sweeping views of Long Island Sound. As my Uber approached the venue, I felt a flutter of anxiety in my stomach. This would be my first time in the same room as Rachel since discovering the affair. I took a deep breath, remembering the woman I had become over the past 6 months. I was no longer the betrayed wife, the abandoned friend. I was Olivia Parker. Senior editor, photographer, survivor. The grand ballroom was already filled with Connecticut's elite when I arrived. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the room, spotting several authors I had worked with, the hospital's chief of pediatrics, and the mayor of our town. And then I saw her. Rachel stood near the stage, clipboard in hand, directing the setup of the auction items. She wore a red dress that I recognized. We had shopped for it together last year, before everything had changed. Her hair was shorter now, but otherwise, she looked exactly the same as the woman I had trusted with my deepest secrets. For a moment, I considered retreating to the terrace. But then Rachel looked up and our eyes met across the crowded room. I saw the shock register on her face, followed by uncertainty. I held her gaze steadily, took a deliberate sip of my champagne, and then turned away to greet one of my authors, who had just arrived. Throughout the evening, I moved through the crowd with a confidence that wasn't entirely feigned. I bid on auction items, made small talk with potential donors, and even danced with the charming head of neurology who seemed pleasantly surprised by my knowledge of brain development in children, a subject I had researched extensively for a recent medical memoir I had edited. I was aware of Rachel watching me from across the room, her attempts to approach thwarted by my careful navigation of the space. It wasn't until I stepped onto the terrace for a moment of quiet that she finally caught up with me. Olivia, she said, her voice small and uncertain. I turned, the silk of my dress catching the moonlight. Rachel, you look amazing, she said, and I could hear the genuine surprise in her voice. Thank you, I replied, my tone polite but distant. I've been trying to reach you for months, she continued. I wanted to explain. There's nothing to explain. I interrupted. You made your choices. So did David. So did I. I never meant to hurt you, she said, the familiar refrain of the guilty. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the confident, polished woman who had been my best friend, but someone diminished by her own actions. The funny thing is, I said quietly, in hurting me, you set me free. I would never have left David on my own. I would have stayed in a marriage that was comfortable, but not fulfilling. I would have continued to put my dreams on hold to support his. So in a way, I should thank you. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I lost everything. Leave. David ended things the day you found out. My other friends won't speak to me. I had to move away and then come back with my tail between my legs when the job in Boston fell through. I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but recognition of the universal truth that actions have consequences. That's the thing about betrayal, I said. It changes everything, including the betrayer. Is there any chance we could ever know? I said firmly. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But I forgive you, Rachel, not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying anger is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy. As if on cue, the head of neurology, Dr. James Chen, appeared at the terrace door, Olivia, thereabout, to announce the auction winners. I smiled at him. I'll be right there, James. Rachel looked between us, a question in her eyes. It was good seeing you, Rachel, I said, moving past her toward the ballroom. I wish you well. As I rejoined the gala, arm lightly linked with James's, I caught sight of a familiar figure near the bar. David stood alone, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement, and I nodded once, before turning my attention back to James and the evening ahead. Later, as James drove me home, he asked, "Was that difficult? Seeing your ex-husband and former friend, I considered the question carefully. Less difficult than I expected," I answered honestly. 6 months ago, I thought they had broken me. Tonight, I realized they merely cracked open a shell I had outgrown. James smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made my heart flutter unexpectedly. "Their loss," he said simply. As we pulled up to my apartment building, I felt a sense of completion. The chapter of my life that had included David and Rachel was truly closing. But my story was far from over. 1 year to the day after I discovered David and Rachel's betrayal, I stood in a sunlit gallery in downtown New Haven, surrounded by my photographs. The exhibition was titled Reconstruction, Portraits of Resilience. It featured images of people who had survived various forms of loss and emerged stronger, a firefighter with burned scars that mapped his courage, a young mother who had lost her home in a flood but found community in the aftermath, an elderly man who tended his wife's garden years after her death. The centerpiece was a self-portrait not of my face, but of my hands holding the shattered pieces of a wedding photograph, arranged to form something new and unexpectedly beautiful. It was both the most personal and the most universal piece. In the collection, the gallery was filled with colleagues from the publishing house, friends I had made in my photography classes, James, who had become a steady presence in my life, though we were taking things slowly, and Kate, who beamed with pride as she overheard visitors discussing my work. I was speaking with the arts reporter from the local paper when Kate appeared at my elbow. "Don't look now," she whispered, "but your past just walked in." I turned discreetly to see David entering the gallery, looking uncertain and out of place in his tailored suit among the more artistic crowd. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, moving deeper into the space to examine the photographs. "Want me to spill wine on him?" Kate offered, only half joking. I laughed softly. "No need for that. This is a public exhibition. He has as much right to be here as anyone." "You're being very mature about this," she observed. "I've had a year to practice," I replied. The truth was, seeing David no longer triggered the pain it once had. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. I had kept my maiden name, Parker, which now appeared on the exhibition catalog, and the byline of the photography column I had started writing for a regional magazine. I excused myself from Kate and made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions about my process. Eventually, I found myself standing before the self-portrait, next to David. "It's powerful," he said quietly, not looking at me. "All of it is. I had no idea you were so talented." "Neither did I admitted. "Or maybe I did, but I never gave myself the chance to find out." He nodded, understanding the implication. "I saw your piece in New England Arts Monthly. You've built quite a name for yourself." "It's been a good year," I said simply. David finally turned to face me. "Olivia, I know I have no right to ask, but I've been hoping we could talk, really talk. Not about getting back together," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "Just closure, I guess." I considered his request. A year ago, I would have refused outright. 6 months ago, I might have agreed out of a lingering need for answers. Now, I wasn't sure what there was left to say, but I found myself nodding. "There's a cafe around the corner. I can meet you there in about an hour." After the main reception ends, relief washed over his face. "Thank you." As he moved away, James approached, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "Everything okay?" he asked, handing me one. "Yes," I said, realizing it was true. "Everything is exactly as it should be." The reception continued with a short speech from the gallery owner and a toast to the exhibition's success. By the time the crowd began to thin, 3 of my photographs had sold, including the self-portrait, purchased by an anonymous bidder. I said goodbye to James, promising to call him later, and walked the short distance to the cafe where David waited at an outdoor table. The evening was mild, the street lively with students and locals enjoying the early autumn weather. "Congratulations again on the exhibition," he said as I sat down. "It's truly impressive." "Thank you." I replied, ordering a tea from the waitress who approached. When we were alone again, David seemed to struggle with where to begin. "I've been in therapy," he finally said, trying to understand why I did what I did, not just to justify it, but to make sure I never hurt someone that way again. I nodded, appreciating his honesty, if not his timing. "I was afraid," he continued. "Afraid of the life we were building, the permanence of it, the expectations. When we started trying for a baby, something in me panicked. Rachel was ... convenient. An escape hatch." He looked down at his hands. "It's not an excuse." "There is no excuse." "No, there isn't," I agreed, "but I understand fear. I was afraid of standing on my own, of pursuing my own dreams, of disappointing you. I used our marriage as a shield against taking risks." David looked surprised. "I never knew you felt that way. I never told you. Maybe I never fully admitted it to myself until everything fell apart." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the cafe and street filling the space between us. "Are you happy, Leave?" he asked finally. I considered the question carefully. "I'm fulfilled," I answered. "I'm challenged and growing and connected to something meaningful. So yes, I'm happy. Are you?" He gave a rueful smile. "Getting there. The firm made me partner, which is what I always thought I wanted. But I'm learning there's more to life than professional success." "Better late than never," I said, without bitterness. "Rachel moved to Chicago," he offered. "In case you were wondering, I wasn't," I said honestly. "But I hope she finds what she's looking for." As our conversation wound down, I realized we had achieved something I hadn't thought possible a year ago, a peaceful acknowledgement of our shared past and separate futures. "There's something I should tell you," David said as we prepared to leave. "I bought your self-portrait. The one with the broken wedding photo." I stared at him, genuinely surprised. "Why, as a reminder," he said simply, "of what was lost, also of what can be created from broken things." He stood, leaving money for our drinks. "Thank you for meeting me, Olivia, and for creating something beautiful from the mess I made." I watched him walk away, a familiar figure becoming increasingly unrecognizable as he moved down the street and out of my life. Back at my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and called James, who answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" he asked. "Surprisingly well," I replied, curling up on my window seat that overlooked the city lights. It felt like closing a book I finally finished reading. "And are you ready to start a new one?" There was a hint of something hopeful in his voice. I smiled, thinking of the photography fellowship application on my desk, an opportunity to document women rebuilding their lives in post-conflict zones around the world. I thought of James, whose patience and respect had shown me what a healthy relationship could be. I thought of the woman I had become, stronger, more authentic, unafraid to claim her space in the world. "I already have," I told him, "several, actually, and I'm writing them myself." As we talked into the night, I gazed at the city spread out before me, a landscape of possibilities I had once been too afraid to imagine. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had instead become the catalyst for my reinvention, not as someone new, but as the woman I was always meant to be. David and Rachel had given me an unexpected gift, the opportunity to discover that I was never defined by their perception of me, but by my own capacity for resilience and growth. That was something they could never take away, and something I would never forget.